بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Last time we had taken the hadith about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying that there will be three people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not speak to on the day of judgment, and He will not look to them. And we said that these three individuals are who? We said number one, al-musbil, and we said, I'm sorry, the one who drags his garment. Good. Who else? Wal-mannan, wal-munfiq sil'atuhu bil-half al-kadhib. So he said that the first was the one who drags his garment. The second one was the one that was namam. That was the previous set of a hadith. Yani the one who does a favor for you, and what does he do? Right, he keeps reminding you of that favor. And the last one was the one who sells something with a false promise, right? With a false promise. And we said, what do these three things have in common? So an individual who drags his garment, an individual who keeps reminding you of the blessings that he did for you, and the last one was the individual who, the arrogance, right? So that's what these three things have in common. And even when we talked about the hadith of, even when we talked about the musbil, we said that is the problem in the action of dragging the garment itself? Is that the issue? No. What was the problem? Right, it was the arrogance that was the issue. And how do we know that the Prophet ﷺ intended arrogance, right? Someone might say, okay, well, that's not what the hadith says. How did we understand that, All right, there's a hadith in Bukhari, right? There's a hadith in Bukhari where Abu Bakr, he came to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Ana ajur thawbi. He said, like, I dragged my garment. And the Prophet ﷺ said, you're not from the people who do it out of arrogance, showing us that dragging the garment it's not the dragging the garment that's the problem. It is the arrogance. So that was the previous hadith. The next set of hadith, قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى وحدثنا أبو بكر بن أبي شيبة قال حدثنا وكيع وأبو معاوية عن الأعمش عن أبي حازم عن أبي هريرة قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ثلاثة لا يكلمهم الله يوم القيامة ولا يزكيهم قال أبو معاوية ولا ينظر إليهم ولهم عذاب أليم شيخ زان وملك كذاب وعال مستكبر. قال حدثنا أبو بكر بن أبي شيبة وأبو كريب قال أخبرنا أبو معاوية عن الأعمش عن أبي صالح عن أبي هريرة وهذا حديث أبي بكر قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ثلاثة لا يكلمهم الله يوم القيامة ولا ينظر إليهم ولا يزكيهم ولهم عذاب أليم رجل على فضل ماء بالفلاة يمنعه من ابن السبيل ورجل بايع رجلا بسرعة بعد العصر فحلف له بالله لأخذها بكذا وكذا فصدقه وهو على غير ذلك ورجل بايع إماما لا يبايعه إلا لدنيا فإن أعطاه منها وفى وإن لم يعطي منها لم يفي. So we'll do the next hadith inshallah, and we'll talk about why it's extremely problematic. There are three things basically. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that there are three people. There are three people, and this is very similar to the previous set of hadith, right? There are three individuals Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not speak to. He will not absolve them, meaning that He will definitely hold them accountable. وقال Muawiyah, and one of the narrators he added, ولا ينظر إليهم, nor will He look toward them. وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ, and they will have a painful punishment. شيخ زان, he said, an elderly man who commits zina. He says, وَمَلِكٌ كَذَّابٌ, he said, a ruler who lies. And he says, وَعَالٍ مُسْتَكْبِرٌ, and he said, the impoverished man, or the one who is poor, who's prideful. So these three, and let's go through them one by one. Sheikh Zan, so the elderly man who commits zina. So why did the Prophet sallallahu, because zina we know is what? It's already a kabira. It's already a major sin. So why did the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam single out the elderly one who commits zina? So, and this tells us a couple things about sins also. Okay, so usually, ideally, when we get older, we tend to draw near or draw further away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Ideally, we should draw near, right? As we age, what happens? Well, supposedly we're supposed to get wiser, right? Supposedly we get wiser. What else? What is the one thing that becomes more apparent the more we age? Death. right? It definitely becomes closer. And how do we feel that? Some will start feeling things, and start feeling joint pains that we didn't feel before. We won't heal as quickly as we did. We become more susceptible for illness, and all of these things are supposed to draw us nearer to death. At least the concept of death and understanding that. And the closer we get to death, the more aware we should be of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's one huge reason, right? There's one reason is that, okay, like, you've reached this old age now. You should understand better than someone who's young. Like, what else? Again, the focus on the elderly. Why? So that's one reason. What is the second possible reason? Is your desire stronger when you're younger or when you're older? When you're younger, right? So not only are you closer to death, but your desire is also weaker, right? So you have all of these things that are actually prohibiting you and stopping you from falling into zina, yet you're still doing it. Yani, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. So these are two major reasons and two big things that that are very indicative on why it is that the Sheikh Zanin is somebody who the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam singled out. Like the second, وَمَلِكُ كَذَّابٍ, that the ruler who lies. Yeah, he's the king, right? He's the king, meaning that what pressure would he receive to lie? None, right? And even if he told the truth, they'd be like, "Oh, king, you took this person's land. Why did you take it? Because I'm bad, right? Like, I'm a bad person, right? And is there anyone who can challenge him? Right? There's no one who can challenge him. This person basically he has zero pressure to lie, and he's still lying. And what does that say about the nature of the person? Right? He's actually a kadhab. This person is actually a liar. And if we look at these two, and the last one, al mustakbar. So this person who is impoverished, he's poor and he's still prideful. Right? So this person he is just has pride. Right? This person is just pride in a state where he should be modest. Right? We so basically what's happening here in the Prophet ﷺ and how he's describing it, he's describing that situationally these people should be less pressured to fall into those sins. And because of age, it's less likely that you should fall into zina. Because you're a king and you're wealthy, you're less pressured to fall huh? Into lying. And if you are poor, you're less likely or less pressured to fall into pride. Right? It doesn't. What are you proud about? What are you proud about? Like meaning that like you are poor, you're impoverished, you have nothing, but you're still showing this pride, based off of what? So this tells us a few things. Number one, the fact that sins are a spectrum, even major sins. So over here, zina, lying, and pride, are these major sins? Absolutely. So the Prophet ﷺ specifying these, right? He could have said the one who makes zina, the one who lies, right, and the one who's mustakbar, right? He could have said these three things, and it would have applied. But here he sallallahu alaihi wasallam is telling us that not only are these sins bad, but even amongst major sins there is a spectrum. It can be worse, right? So these sins are bad, and there's still situations that cause these sins to be worse. And also the other thing that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam is teaching us and inclining in telling us is that environment environment has an effect, and we should always put ourselves in the environment that will be good. Saying that, these individuals actually have negative pressure. Yes? Right? These individuals actually have negative pressure. So there are some people, even with negative pressure, they'll still what? They'll still fall into sin. They'll still fall into sin. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. The next hadith, this hadith Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that there are three individuals, or there are three people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not speak to, nor will he look toward them, nor will he absolve them of their punishment. وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ, and they will have a painful punishment. رَجُلٌ عَلَى فَضْلِ الْمَاءَ بِالْفُلَاتِ يَمْنَعُهُ مِنْ إِبْنِ السَّبِيلِ. So there's an individual who owns water, right? He has a river or he has a well or something, and the people who are passing through, he doesn't provide it, right? He doesn't give it to them, and he's the owner of this oasis, right? He's an owner of this water, and he doesn't provide it for anyone. The second person over here, he says, ورجل باع رجل بزات بعد الأثر فحلف له بالله لأخذها بكذا وكذا فصدقه. So the second one is that this person, he sells a commodity to another, right? He sells something to another person in the afternoon, and he takes an oath by Allah, he swears by Allah that he bought it at such and such a price, right? So and unfortunately many of us have probably experienced this. It's happened to me, you know, where someone will be like, I think I was in Pakistan and somebody was selling a hat. So I was like, you know, how much is the hat? And he was like 250 or rupees or something. So I said, I'll give you 100. And he's like, man, he's like, I'll sell it to you, but I'm losing money by selling it to you at that price. And I was like, then I'm not here to oppress you. I'd rather not buy it. So he was like, no, okay, fine. You know, it's like, I was like, Akhi, don't lie. Like, at least don't lie. Just, it's fine. Like, I understand that you want to make money, but by lying, don't worry, you're not making me feel bad, right? You're trying, but you're not making me feel bad. If you want to sell it, you have every right to sell it. If you don't want to sell it, you have every right not to sell it. And this is how transactions should be, right? We should be very transparent. Do I need to tell someone how much I purchased something for? Huh? No, like I don't need to say. If I bought a car for 6,000, I'm selling it for 10,000. Do I need to tell this person, oh, I bought it for 6? No, right? I don't need to tell that person how much I got it for. It's none of their business how much ever I purchased it for. Unfortunately, in some cultures, this is actually a tactic that people use, right? They'll be like, oh, yeah. They'll be like, oh, how much did you get it for? And my answer is like, none of your business. Like, I got it for however much I got it for, but I can tell you how much I'm selling it for, right? Which is the price that I have right here. And and part of the problem with that is like, okay, even if I tell them, it's like, oh, you're making $5 on this, or you're making $10 on this, you know, each and every one of this, and like, you know, even family members will tell me, it's like, oh, you know, they're making X amount of money on it. I said, does it matter? Does it matter how much money that this person's making? He's making 1,000% markup on it. Are you willing to pay that price or not? And if you're willing to pay the price, be happy that he's earning. He's earning a profit. There's nothing wrong with it. Is there a problem Islamically in making a profit? No. And just because I'm making a profit on something, does it mean that $4 or that $6 or $1,000 is that going into my pocket? Not necessarily. I need a shelf to store that product. I need a store to put that product in. Sometimes I need employees to help me sell that product. So yes, there is a markup, and yes, there is a margin that's there, but I'm keeping the margin in mind, saying that, okay, I need to keep that margin because I have these expenses that I have to take care of. And again, this is nobody's business, right? I can ask how much money did you make, but if I'm sitting there calculating in my head like, oh, he made this much money, this doesn't create goodwill between Muslims. It doesn't, right? I don't even think it's a healthy attitude that we as Muslims should have. Yes, yeah. Hmm. Yeah. He has to make profit. Yes, there is. So the question, this excellent question. How much profit am I allowed to make? Right. Low. So let's say I have a gas station, Mikhail has a gas station, and Ibrahim has a gas station, and Abdul has a gas station. Right. There are 4 gas stations. All of us are purchasing gas at $2 a gallon. Right. This is the purchase price. I'm charging $6. What is going to happen? Mikhail is going to be like, well, he's charging 6. Let me charge 550. Ibrahim's like, well, I'm still making money. Let me charge $5. Abdul will be like, well, I'm still making money because I bought it at $2. Let me sell it for $4.50. Who set the price here? Huh? Well, the $6 guy, I didn't set the price because I'm not getting customers. They're all going where? Right? They're going to Abdul, and if they think his gas station is too busy, where are they going to go? They're going to go to you, right? Because you're the one who's next to me and him. We didn't get any business, so what do we do? How do we react? We go lower than Abdul because we're still making money. So to answer your question, it's like a two-part question. There's a hadith of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ where he said, "La tusa'iru fa inna Allah lahul musa'ir." He says, don't set prices, meaning the government shouldn't set prices on goods because who sets those prices? The market. The market sets the price of goods. Um, is there a point where it doesn't reach the stage of like dhulm in taking advantage? Yes, right there that definitely has to be there. But the question then comes, well, what is dhulm? You know, dhulm is whatever people are not willing to pay, because I can charge however much I want, even if all of us agree. I was like, hey, Abdul, hey guys, listen, let's just charge $6, okay? What's going to happen is that people just won't buy gas, right? Who? Yes. And how long can I hold out as a business owner? Right, I can't hold out very long. I might be able to hold out a day, a week, right? Like I don't think I'll be able to go much more than that. Then I'm going to have to start adjusting to whatever the market is, what they want. So it becomes, it's a very subjective question. There's no, we don't have any shar'i had, right? So, well, 150% markup, is that okay? You know, 200%, 1,000%, like how do we determine those things? And the thing is, even with markup, if you look at individual items, it's different, right? So how come I can charge 100% markup on beans, but I can only charge 50% markup on wheat? Wallahu a'lam. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has created this market system amongst humans to kind of decide the thing that we can do best, because there's one thing that is for clear not permissible, and that is a monopoly. Right? The Prophet ﷺ mana al-ihtikar, right? So he prohibited monopolies. And why? So that this competition can happen. Because if I'm the only one that sells gas, what happens? I decide. I can set my own price, and it doesn't matter what the people want. So I think it's very important to understand that Islam is a very much a open market system, right? It's very much an open market system. The only thing it prohibits us from doing, like I said, is a monopoly. And this hadith is a great example of what else it prohibits us from doing, which is promising, right? Making, it's like, wallahi, I bought this for $6. And why is he promising that he bought it for that price? Right? To convince you to be like, oh man, this guy, man, this is the cost price. Man, I got I'm winning. I got a great deal. I got a great deal on this. When the reality is that he's lying, right? He's lying. So I think with these two systems in place that can be enforced by the government, breaking monopolies and making sure that people are not lying, right? So if these two things can be controlled, it kind of allows the market to run and dictate and set its own prices. Right, like so right now I think oil's at like what, $70 a barrel or something. Like, what changes the price? All right, it's just demand, right? It's, you know, it's like a supply and demand type of thing, and things kind of move up and down. But we cannot come and be like, no, oil needs to be sold at this price, right? Or, you know, cars need to be sold at this price, because there's just so many variances and there's so many things that are happening. There was actually a committee that did this in communist Russia, right? So in communist Russia, they had to go through and actually sit down and set the prices of like millions of items. And guess what happened? They gave up, right? Like, this is not sustainable. This is not realistic. This is not even possible. So having that open market is something that's important, because it allows for open competition and to keep prices down, right? And to keep prices down. And the last person here, that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that an individual who he takes allegiance to an imam, to a leader. He takes allegiance to a leader, and he only listens to him when he gives him something. So it's a zero-sum relationship. So over here, the Prophet Muhammad says, وَرَجُلٌ بَاعَ رَجُلٌ بِسِلْعَةٍ no, not this one. وَرَجُلٌ بَاعَ إِمَامًا لَا يُبَاعِهُ إِلَّا لِلدُّنْيَا. So he says that he does not take bay'ah to him, he does not take allegiance to him, except for a dunyawi reason. فَإِنْ أَعْطَاهُ مِنْهَا وَفَى. So he says that whenever he gives him something, he fulfills his agreement with him, or he fulfills his allegiance to him. وَإِنْ لَمْ يُعْطِيهِ مِنْهَا لَمْ يَفِي. So, and whenever he's not given something, he does not fulfill that. Like, over here, what's happening? And what is bay'ah? Bay'ah is a pledge of allegiance, right? It's a pledge of allegiance. In general, within any nation state, what does a pledge of allegiance do? What does that look like? I'm sorry? It's part of it. So here, if we have a leader, right? We have a leader and he's like, okay, pledge allegiance to me. What does that mean? Yeah, right. So basically, what am I doing by doing that? By saying this publicly, what have I done? Right. I said that you have my support. Right. You have my support, meaning that if somebody tries to invade, what's going to happen? I'm going to stand up and I'm going to defend this place and this land. And if you say like, okay, hey, listen, we're going to make a preemptive strike and we're going to go to war over here, what's going to happen? You're going to join, right? And this is exactly what has happened in the modern day nation states, right? So when I signed my passport, what have I done? I pledged my allegiance, right? I pledged my allegiance to that country, or I pledged my right. Everybody got uncomfortable, right? I pledge my allegiance to that state, meaning that whatever laws that space and that state comes up with, I'm going to obey and I'm going to follow them. And in turn, what is the state going to give me? Protection, right? Protection, law and order in general, right? Protection and law and order. This is what's going to be provided to me, and I'm going to provide for the state that I'm going to follow the rules and I'm going to obey. This type of transactional relationship, right? Because is it possible that I take an allegiance to a leader or to a country and I don't like some of the laws? Right? Right? Like, I mean, we live in the United States. Do we like all of the laws that are here? No, right? And there might be laws that I dislike and there might be laws that Mikhail likes. Everybody is going to look at things in a different way, which is fine. But does that mean that I'm not like, okay, well, I don't like the speed limits, right? There shouldn't be any speed limits in in the United States. Therefore, I'm going to stop listening to the government. Does it work like that? No, right? It can't work like that. Why? So why is this so important? This idea of following a government or following leadership. Right? You need society to be functional, right? You need society to be functional. And if he decides not to follow the rules and she decides not to follow the rules and what happens? It's just chaos, right? It's chaos. People are like, oh, forget these green lights and forget this speed limit, and they'll walk into stores and they'll be like, I'll take things, right? And it just leads to chaos. And does that benefit the individual? Never, right? Never. It never benefits the individual. Yes. Sure. So if the leaders are corrupt, what is my role and what do I do? Sure. So there are means I can take to deal with that, and going and having, like, for example, revolutions, right? Revolutions, protesting, voting. There are different ways for us to engage with government. So the question then comes: at what point do I fight against the government? Where do I draw the line? And that's not an easy question, because there are some places where they fought the government, and what happened? It got worse, right? And unfortunately, throughout history, I think most of the time, what happens? It get it got worse. It didn't get any better. But in terms of our personal lives, there are laws that are divine, right? As individuals, there are divine laws in place, meaning that, can I say, oh, the ruler is corrupt, I'm going to stop praying? No, right? We can never do that. But if there are certain things, and when it comes to corruption, at that point, I can start looking at what are the things that will protect me and my family. So, because the ruler is corrupt, should I start speeding? Hmm? Because the ruler is corrupt, um, should I start stealing? No. So it's very important to kind of keep things in context. Like, okay, well, if the ruler is corrupt, what does that mean? And just because a leader is corrupt, does that mean that every single subordinate under that leader is corrupt? Right? It's unfortunately, it's not a very clear black and white answer when it comes to dealing in those spaces. Um, if a leader is corrupt, should I not go and apply for the deed for the land, right? Or can I just go and be like, oh, well, nobody's using this land, and I start building a house, right? I think it's a very romantic idea sometimes, where we're like, oh, this leader is evil, or he killed these people, or he took advantage of this. But when it comes to the ground reality of us, like, do we still follow the zoning laws, right? Do we still follow the street laws? Some people might argue, like, okay, well, what about taxation? How do we deal with the taxes? Because we know that this money is going for bad things, but some of that money, it's also going to maintaining the roads, right? Some of that money is going to maintaining the electric company. Some of that money. So how do I determine what is being used and what is not being used. I try to do the like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in that situation, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَل لَهُ مَخْرَجًا, right? Like I try to have as much taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as I can. And like I've seen in places where the government is very corrupt. So what are some things that people start doing? They start littering, right? You know, they'll drive around and they'll just throw like a plastic bag out the window. Or I'll be like, well, what's going on? It's like, oh, it's so corrupt here, and I'm like, well, this isn't helping, right? This doesn't help with lessen the corruption in any way, shape, or form. Um, so, like I said, I think there's this very romantic idea on what we should do and like revolution and things, and I'm saying like even even revolutions that happened in the Islamic world, and I'm talking about even very historically. Like if we look at like Hussein radiallahu anh, he was very much justified, right? He had people who were behind him. He had a corrupt leadership that he was fighting against. He had the support. He had the charisma, the valor. He had the right? He had the actual right to do it because of who he was. Like his position was higher than any other political leader that was available at the time. He was deserving. And what happened? Sometimes it's not about what's right, right? Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. This is excellent. Yes. Hmm. Sure. That's no, no. That's an excellent question. So very practically, if I am in a situation where I am being oppressed to the point where I cannot practice my religion, and in the Quran we have an example of this with who? With Musa and Fir'aun, right? And uh, oh, hijrah. Yeah, the hijrah. So one option is what? To leave. One option is to leave. And is this a cowardly option? No, absolutely. I don't think so. Because what am I going to do? I'm going to establish my religion. I might even regroup, right? There might be a group of people that come with me and we regroup, and it's like, okay, no, listen, we need to go about this the different way. When the Prophet ﷺ, or like when the companions were weak, what did the Muslims do in Mecca? Before Hijrah, what did they do? They're in hiding, right? They're in hiding, and even subhanallah, even the ahkam, even the rulings of Islam about hijab and prayer and all these things, when did they come? And they came in Medina, and that's very telling to us. Why did they come in Medina? Because the Muslims had they could openly practice now, right? There was nothing that was infringing on them. There's nothing that was holding them back. It's like subhanallah, like some of the the ex-Russian countries, man, like when they like came and they imposed on people, people are praying with their lights off. You know, they're combining all of their prayers at night. Some people are praying just with their eyelids. You know, it's like I know people who are in jail, and like they said they wouldn't let them pray. Yeah. You guys done? Okay. So, uh, like I know people in jail, like even in some Muslim countries. Like it's just so oppressive. If a person has an option to leave, then I would suggest they leave. If they have an option to make change, to make change, right? But how is that done? Like I wish there was an easy way to do it. I really do. But even good leaders that we have or we've had, what happens to them? Right, they're like politically sidelined. They're politically sidelined, and it's just really sad. And I'm not trying to paint like a grisly, grim picture of like, oh, there's no way out, and like, oh, they'll like this is how it is, and you kind of have to deal with it. I think that if we look to victory politically, we're not going to get it. I don't think we will. But I think if we look for religious victories, I think we can have it. Because even in our Islamic history, what percentage of our Islamic political history is good? It's like very little. Right? You have like the Khulafa Rashidun, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, Harun al-Rashid. Like we can literally name them, right? Like we can name these people, and in between we had like really bad leaders. Like we just didn't have a lot of good Muslim leaders, unfortunately. And why? Because that's the nature of politics. Okay. Usually, do good people usually go into politics? No, usually not. Right? It's usually not. they're usually not the most successful people, and they're driven by power. They're usually driven by influence. They're usually driven by wealth, and this is why you don't usually find good people in politics. But in the religious sector, alhamdulillah, you do. And I think as long as we stand by our principles, as long as we keep standing together, as long as we keep practicing our deen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in yansuru in tansurullah yansuruk, right? If you give Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala victory, Allah will give you victory. Keep practicing, stand on your principles, stand for what's right, and you will get that victory. Does that mean that you'll get like a country? No, not necessarily. But it does mean that you'll get a place that is safe for yourself. You'll get a place that's safe for your children. You'll find a place that will cater to what it is that you're doing. And sometimes you find it in the most unexpected spaces. Islam, from the immigrants, has only been in America for how long? Like 50, 60 years. Not even. Like, we've built masajid, we've built schools, we've built funeral homes, we've built community centers, like we've built institutions of higher education. There's so many things that we've done and accomplished here. Why? Because we stood by our principles. Like in most, even our political involvement, when was it done? It's like much later. Like it's only around like after 9/11 that Muslims really started getting involved politically. Otherwise, they weren't very involved. Even now, like are Muslims like super involved politically? In general, no. Like I don't even think most Muslims vote. And I'm not saying that in a good or a bad way, right? It just is what it is. But saying that, okay, our political involved, and I'm not saying don't be politically involved, but at the same time, our victory is not going to come through that. Our victory will always come through our religion, our establishment of it, our practicing of it, our instilling that and our values in our children, and that's what's going to carry it forward. Is it frustrating, that we have so many corrupt leaders? Yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah. So some. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Mm. Just. Yep. Absolutely. Hmm. Hmm. We still have institutions, right? So right now, a lot of people they rightfully so complain about the divorce system in the U.S. Right? You know how it is unequal and stuff like that. But people who go through an Islamic process, do they face the same challenges? No, and that's if they accept, right? So you can actually go to a Muslim arbitrator, or you can go to a Muslim who will say, okay, well, no, these are the rights that are due, and this is how it should be done. And if they agree, alhamdulillah, that's great, and it ends up being more just. But if we have situations where there is injustice, well, we recognize them and we try to come up with solutions. But in general, alhamdulillah, I would say there is justice within the Muslim community. And the reason I can say that is I, as a Pakistani American, I was hired as an imam of an Arab masjid, right? That's very progressive, and it's very telling. Um, I had Adams predominantly Indo-Pak, right? And their imam is Sudani, right? It's not. It's these are all very much signs of the progression, the progression of the Muslim Ummah, and how we're very tolerant religiously and Islamically, and that's why we're able to grow. Like, do we get frustrated sometimes with like boards and leadership? Yeah, yeah, we do, and that's real. But the prayers are still being established. People are still coming out for programs. There's still a lot of activities that are happening within those spaces, and we can improve. I definitely like. There's a lot of improvement that's required, but I think we're still doing pretty well. Like, I still think, alhamdulillah, there's a lot of hope. We have a lot of Muslim think tanks. We have Muslim magazines. We have Muslim journals. We have Muslim newspapers. Like, a lot of books that are being written. I think as Muslim Americans, I think we're very relatively successful. I think we're relatively successful, and there's still room to succeed. No, تفضل. because we're all from Islamic countries. Like we don't know too much about. Like not all of us are familiar with what's happening in non-Muslim countries. Like in those countries, like if you look at China, or if you look at Russia has improved, I think as of recent, but like communist Russia, communist China, what was happening, the homicides and the genocides that were happening in many of the African countries, the poverty that's happening in South America. The reason we don't speak on them too much is because there's very few of us who are from those places. But if you look at the death and the killing and the corruption and the inflation and all these things, it's actually much worse than what many of us complain about from the countries that we're from. Like, right now we know what's happening in Egypt, and we know what's happening in Libya and Morocco and Tunis and in Lebanon and Kenya. Like all of these like countries and spaces where there are so many Muslims, we just have so much intimate knowledge because we're from there. But places like Rwanda, how many Muslims do we have here from Rwanda that we actually hear about, or Uganda, or what I mean, like, or Congo, or Ivory Coast? Like we don't hear too much about those places because we don't know people from those places. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. And that's the second problem, right? The first problem is we're not from there. Secondly, our expectations from other Muslims is higher. Like we have a higher standard for them. If somebody says like, "Oh, China's so oppressive," they're like, "Yeah, well, they're Buddhist or they're atheist." Like we would expect them to be harsh. But Egypt or Lebanon or like Tunis, like, well, these are our people, and the reason we were so upset about that is because, like, well, they're Muslim. They shouldn't act like that. They shouldn't be oppressive. They shouldn't hurt other people. So I think that the expectations is definitely part of it. So it's like a two-part thing. We don't know too many people from those spaces, so it's difficult to comment. And the expectations, like my expectations for Egypt is very different from my expectations from Venezuela, right? Right? I would expect Egypt to be on a higher moral standard, and I would expect them to do better things. Or in Morocco versus Brazil, right? I would expect them to do certain things. So I think that these are definitely they're important conversations, and we as Muslims living in a space where we don't like, is there oppression? Yeah, but it's not as bad as from some of the places that we come from, meaning that we should thrive more. Like we should be doing better. Like we're doing well, alhamdulillah, but I think that we don't have the same obstacles, so we should be doing even more and we should be doing even better. How do we even get to this discussion? Oh, we're talking about social order, right? We're talking about listening to the ruler and maintaining that social order. قال وحدثني زهير بن حرب قال حدثنا جرير وتحويل الإسناد وحدثنا سعيد بن عمرو الأشعثي قال أخبرنا عبثر كلاهما عن الأعمش بهذا الإسناد مثله غير أن في حديث جرير ورجل ساوم رجل بسلعته. So over here, there is a these are other additional chains that Imam Muslim is bringing for the previous hadith, and he says that except in the hadith of Jarir, there's one thing that he changes. He says that an individual, he offers he undercuts someone else. So in one the previous hadith he promised, in the second one he undercuts. And how does the undercut how does that basically work? So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, يعني لا تبيع على بيع أخي. Like don't undercut your brother. Meaning, yeah, yes, yeah. So no, that's more dealing, right? So you have every right in Islam to haggle, right? So haggling is fine. There's nothing. Yeah, no, that even that is different. So let me give another example. So for example, uh, I'm selling an iPhone, and you're coming, and I'm like, hey, I'll sell you the iPhone for $1,000. Mikhail, he pulls you to the side, and he's like, hey, listen, I'll give it to you for 900. Right? This is undercutting, right? So this is exactly what the Prophet ﷺ is talking about, on undercutting. But if I have a store and I'm selling it for 1,000, and he has a store and he's selling it for 900, that's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The only time you can't do it is like when you're actually coming and pulling someone away. Another example of this is like لا تخطب على خطبة أخيك. He says, don't propose to a woman that you know is being proposed to by your brother. But if I don't know, then it's fine. It's permissible. Again, this idea of undercutting, why? Because it sows distrust, right? It sows distrust in the community. In the last hadith of this section, قال وحدثني عمر الناقد قال حدثنا سفيان عن عمر عن أبي صالح عن أبي هريرة قال أراه مرفوعا قال ثلاثة لا يكلمه الله ولا ينظر إليهم ولهم عذاب أليم رجل حلف على يمين بعد صلاة العصر على مال مسلم فاقتطعه وباقي حديثه نحو حديث الأعمش. So over here, it's a similar wording from previous hadith. Well, basically, there are three people with who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not speak, nor would he look at them, nor would there would be a painful punishment for them. وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ رَجُلٌ حَلَفَ عَلَى يَمِينٍ بَعْدَ صَلَاةِ الْعَصْرِ, that an individual, he makes a promise, right? He took an oath on the good deeds of a Muslim in the afternoon, and then he breaks it, right? So he makes a promise and then he breaks it, meaning the same day. He makes a promise in the afternoon and he breaks it right by the evening, and the rest of the hadith is the same as the other one. So this idea of breaking promises and not fulfilling them, it's important for us to make sure that we maintain that social commitment, right? This idea of the social fabric that exists between the Muslims, that when we make a promise, we have to make sure that we are fulfilling that promise, whether it be to someone whether it be to a consumer, right, or whether it be to a customer, or whether it be to a leader, or whether it be to each other, right? So over here you have issues that are talking about zina, you're talking about sales, you're talking about politically. All of these things intertwine, right? All of these things intertwine, and the idea behind them is that there is a social fabric that exists, right? There's a social fabric that exists between the Muslims, and that fabric is something that needs to be maintained. And the way to maintain that is with trust. Because once you lose trust in the society, what happens? Right? Everybody starts taking advantage of each other. And this is why law and order is so important, to make sure that there's someone to actually enforce these concepts and to enforce these ideas. And sometimes we'll look at the social structure, or we'll look at these individual deeds, or we'll even look at it like in a larger community or political spectrum, and we lose sight of those things. We have to make sure that we're following rules, not for my sake, but for the sake of society, to make sure that there is structure, to make sure that there is form, to make sure that there is an understanding that we can all fall back on. Because if we all follow the same system, it allows that recourse when there is a problem or when there is an issue. And the moment we start doing things to lose trust in each other, people don't want to work in those spaces. And like, just a very simple example of this is that people will walk into a Walmart or a Target or a Costco, and they'll just pick up items, right? They'll pick up items. Sometimes we won't even look at the price, and then what do? We'll go to the register. We won't look at how they're ringing it up, right? Unless something looks really off. And when it's time to pay, what do? We pay. But if we'll go into stores that are run by Muslims, do we always have the same attitude? And not just that, we'll pay very happily. Like, oh wow, it was only X amount, it was only like $200. But we don't have that same attitude many times walking into Muslim spaces or walking into Muslim stores. Why? I mean, it's definitely a trust issue for sure, but where's the trust lost? How much more often do I have to worry about something being expired from a Muslim store than I do a non-Muslim one? Sometimes it's a little bit higher. Sometimes, I'm sorry? Right, there are multiple. So what happens is, like, multiple interactions cause me to, right, to have that doubt and to lose that trust. So that we have to make sure that we maintain that trust, because we want the same happiness that when we walk into a Costco or a Target. Again, why? Because we hold ourselves to a higher standard, and Allah knows best. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.